Big brother is watching you. You're Socrates. I really wish you'd stop doing this. You're not Big Brother. What's that? I know you always wanted to be Big Brother. You're not, okay? You might be a big brother, but you're not Big Brother. Okay, look, Socrates, you're cool, man. You've gone down in history for some cool stuff. You don't have to be Big Brother. If anybody's going to be Big Brother, it would be this guy. Neither of you is Big Brother. Guys, I'm really sorry about that. Welcome to the Alyosha Society. We're going to keep on pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. And what do we have coming up? Yeah, 1984. And why red? I thought about this one a lot. This is kind of a tough one. We know of the expression red China, which has referred to the Communist Party of China. We also know that red is associated with the totalitarian regime of the Soviet Union in the 20th century, and even now as well. And unfortunately, the color red also reminds us of blood and bloodshed. And a lot of that takes place with totalitarian regimes. That's what we're going to be talking about. Yeah, friends, I wish I could tell you we had, a happy, jovial story to look at. This story is anything but happy and jovial. In fact, it's the very opposite. The genre that we're looking at now is called a dystopian novel, which literally means a world in which everything has gone bad and wrong. So this is our introductory video. Let's get right to some of the things that we need to look at. Okay, 1984. I'm excited about it. I think this is an important novel. I think it's a novel that no one should go through high school without reading this novel. The vocabulary alone that is really a part of our everyday culture. A lot of folks don't even realize that that vocabulary came from this novel. Newspeak, Big Brother is watching you, Mini True, Ministry of Truth, all these things. So we got a lot to talk about, and I'm hoping to give you a good intro here to kind of get you ready for it. But yeah, first of all, I just kind of wanted to creep you out a little bit. Big Brother is watching you. Socrates, stop. Okay, I'm sorry again about that. Okay, here's the big picture, friends. We are going to be looking at a total of 10 videos. This is our introduction, and we're going to be doing things very differently with this novel. I just wanted to mix it up a little bit. Now, if you've been having me for classes, you know that what I normally do is I basically divide the videos up into, chapters 1 through 3, then 4 through 6, and then whatever, 7 and 8, and move on. I'm not going to do it that way this time. I'm going to do it thematically. Now, on the Canvas website, I will be listing the chapters that I want you to read, before you watch each video. So that'll be on Canvas. And if you're just watching these videos for fun, maybe, and you're not necessarily taking the course, then what I would say is, if you don't have access to that, just look at the novel, divide it up into 10 sections. It's I don't know, what is it, about a 280 page novel? Yeah, right at it. It's about, well, a little bit less than that. It's really more like 250, 260. Read 25 or 30 pages, then watch the next video, because that's basically what we're going to be doing. So if you look down through each video, you'll see the topic I'm going to cover. Setting, geography, slogans, and ministries in the next one. After that, we're going to talk about the brotherhood aspect of the story. Then we're going to talk about marriage and family, and then many true and media, and so forth, all the way down. So there will be overlap in the reading with the topics, but not necessarily in the same way. Don't get me wrong, throughout the videos, we will kind of catch up and look at the plot development. But I don't believe the plot is really the most important thing about 1984, and that's why I'm doing these videos this way. What George Orwell is trying to do is to create a dystopian world, a possible world that I believe he believed could come into existence. This world could actually exist. And in fact, we know now that this world does exist in some countries of the world today. And that's what Orwell is trying to do, is create this world, not really so much develop a plot. The plot is definitely important, and we'll look at it, but I just want you to know how we're going to be walking through these videos. Let's go ahead and put me in the toolbox here. I know it, Mr. Eder. I've seen the literary toolbox so many times, it comes alive to me in my dreams. Good. That means we're getting somewhere. So I want to begin with genre questions, as you can see in red there. And then also in this video, we're gonna look at historical context and biographical context, I think. Yeah. But we're going to be looking at all the items in the literary toolbox. So let's begin with the genre questions. As I said earlier, the genre of this novel is dystopia, or dystopian novel. The word dystopia literally means bad place. Bad place. So a dystopian novel is usually set sometime in the future, and the world has ended, or there's been a nuclear holocaust, or something, or some plague has wiped out almost everybody on planet Earth, and there's a handful of people left, and we got to figure out if they're going to survive and perpetuate the human race. This is a dystopian novel. Not so much that the world has been destroyed by war or famine or disease, but that certain kinds of governments have taken over the countries of the world, and it's very, very bad. These governments are authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorships, and all freedom is gone. Okay, the common man does not have freedoms anymore like we have today. So here are the questions that I would suggest you look at. Again, yes, in this novel, but anytime you're reading anything in the dystopian genre, what brought about the dystopian world? That's kind of the first thing you want to find out. Like, when is it happening? Is it in the future? What caused it? Who's living in it? And why are those people still alive in this dystopian world? How do you get by? If this is a world where it's all bad, then how do you get by? How do you live in it? That's a really important question to ask, whether you're looking at Hunger Games or Maze Runner. I mean, there's a lot of, right now the dystopian genre is very, very popular, but novels and movies. Are there elements of this future world in our world today? Now, that one is huge in this story. In other words, yes, this bad world could come about, but hey, what's going to make it come about is if we don't recognize that there could be elements of that bad world, that dystopia, right now. And I believe that's what George Orwell wants us to do here. George Orwell, I believe, wants us to say, hey, wake up and realize that we are actually living in a dystopian world in some ways. And if we don't recognize those ways and deal with it, it could get much worse. Number 5, is the author trying to clue the reader into something specific? So is there an agenda? Is there a political agenda that the author has? We'll talk about that. How do we avoid bringing about this dystopian world? Obviously. Okay. So these are your genre questions, We do those for every new genre, as you know. Let's go back to our literary toolbox. Now that we've looked at genre questions, what I'd like to do in this video is get to historical and biographical context. And as you know, what that means is When was this novel written? Who wrote it? What do we know about this person? What was going on in the world? What is all of that? How can all of that help us understand the story better? All right, well, let's begin with biographical context. Let's talk about George Orwell. Who is this? Who is this guy? Well, first of all, that's not his name. His name was not George Orwell. He used this pseudonym because, he was writing about very controversial issues, and he feared in some ways what could happen to him as a result. So he used a fake name, or what we call a pseudonym. His real name was Eric Arthur Blair. He was born in India in 1903, and you're thinking, oh, he doesn't look Indian. He wasn't Indian. He was British down to the core. He was a son of a British civil servant. Mr. Editor, I don't understand. He was born in India. Yes, friends, remember, at this time in history, the British Empire had colonies all over the globe. And this area of the world was actually ruled by Great Britain at this time. So India was under control of the government of Great Britain. And so you'll see a lot of folks from England either spent time in or worked in India because India was a part of the British Empire. And Eric Arthur Blair's father was one of these individuals. He came to England when he was 1. So Orwell probably doesn't remember a whole lot about that 1 year in India. Just to give you a little context, he was interested in writing from an early age, kind of an academic of sorts, wrote a poem when he was 11 years old. So he knew from early on that he enjoyed writing. When he was 19 years old, he joined the India Imperial Police Force. So he's already kind of thinking and having an interest in civil service, giving back, government, law enforcement. These kinds of things are on his mind from an early age. Myanmar, also known as Burma. So I think we would use Myanmar today. 1927, so he's 24 years old. He leaves Burma and he goes back to England to pursue, once again, he had been interested in writing from an early age, and he goes back to pursue his writing career. He wrote a book called Burmese Days in 1934, and this is kind of an interesting little tidbit about Orwell. He was writing against British imperialism. That is, the idea and the practice that Great Britain was taking over these territories and colonizing these territories in other parts of the world. Just because you're British doesn't mean you're in favor of that. And George Orwell was not. So once again, there's this interest in politics, world government, what's going on globally, what is his own government doing. You see how these things all tie in with why he would write books like, and if you're taking the Great Books 4 course, is that if that's the reason you're doing 1984, then you've already done Animal Farm with me. Animal Farm was our first book, again, by George Orwell. So he was very interested in socialism, democratic socialism. He was interested in critiquing communism, and that's what he did in Animal Farm, as he gave basically a scathing critique of the Russian Revolution. 1936, so he's 33 years old now. He fought against Franco. Now he's in Spain, fighting in the Spanish Civil War. His interest in global politics is growing. He even got injured in fighting against Franco in the Spanish Civil War. He married, and also in 1936, so he's 33 years old here. He married a lady named Eileen. He takes a job with the BBC in his late 30s. 1941 again. So you've got these two things that you see with Orwell in his biography: politics and writing and politics. So it should not be surprising to us that he wrote books like Burmese Days and Animal Farm and 1984. He put them together, and with some tremendous impact. Again, we already talked about 1984. I'm sorry, Animal Farm. So he wrote Animal Farm right before he wrote 1984. Why did he call it 1984? Well, Orwell wanted to come up with a time period that would be far enough off into the distance in the future that people would think, ooh, we don't know what things are going to be like then. And Orwell was sitting there thinking one day, and it was 1948 when he was writing, and he thought to himself, what if I just switch the last two numbers and go with 1984? I mean, that's almost 40 years into the future. If you think 40 years into the future now, the making of this video, that'd be the year 2043. That does sound like, wow, that's going to be a crazy different, world. So the book was published in 1949, as you can see on the slide there, but he wrote the book in 1948. So he just reversed those last two numbers, and that's why he called the book 1984. This is one of those sad realities. Orwell died at age 47. Can you believe that? He was only 47 years old when he died in 1950. I believe that Orwell had a lot more in him, and who knows if he would have lived a long life, what he might have accomplished. Now, what was George Orwell in terms of his own beliefs? Well, on the religious side of things, he was an atheist. That's right, he was an atheist. Now, interestingly, he was also a good Englishman, so he attended the Anglican Church. But as far as we know, he did not believe in the God of the Anglican Church or the God of the Christian faith. He was an atheist, so that's important to keep in mind. We probably, if you're taking the course and you already did Animal Farm, I realize all of this is a lot of review, but I have to assume that some folks are doing this as an individual book, and they may not have gone through Animal Farm. What did he believe politically? He was a socialist. I know if this is the first time you've ever had any involvement with studying George Orwell, that may be a surprise to you. Well, wait a second. I thought he wrote Animal Farm and he was writing against socialism and communism. No, he did write Animal Farm, but he was not against socialism. He was against the way it was implemented by the Russians in 1917. He was actually a democratic socialist. I know, somebody just woke up from his nap. What? Did somebody say democratic socialist? Yeah, Bernie. Bernie just kind of sits on the side over here and waits for someone to say democratic socialist so he can say, hoo-yah! Yeah, not a fan, Bernie, not a fan. But see, what Orwell is doing is opposing the totalitarianism. That is the violent dictatorial approach of some of these governments in the 20th century. That's really what he's opposing. That's what he is going after in 1984. But here's the thing. Orwell also sought to oppose what he believed was that same impulse in his own government, his own country. And for that reason, he was definitely pretty far left on the political spectrum. You know what I mean by that? We kind of look at politics as sort of a line, a spectrum, a broad range. And we say people on the right are more conservative. People on the left are more liberal. So George Orwell was much more to the left. He opposed British imperialism. He was a democratic socialist. And he also wrote against what he called the abuses of capitalism. All this is very important. Oh, look, here we are back to our literary toolbox. Now, we went over our genre questions. You got those handy, right? We just went over some historical and biographical context that I think is going to help you better understand this story. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the elements of the plot because we haven't got there yet. I just want to remind you of our plot arc. Remember, the plot arc, most stories follow some variation of this sort of 5-stage system. there's an introduction, an exposition, the story begins. Here are the characters, here's where we are. And then there's this kind of tension that begins to build, this rising. Oh, you're going to see that in this novel, trust me. And then there's a climactic moment. There's a key moment that is just loaded with tension and suspense and sometimes action. We call that the climax of the story. And it really defines the story and where things are headed from here. Then after that, it's sort of like you've reached the top of the mountain and then you start going down the other side of the mountain. Then what happens after this great climactic moment? We call that the falling action. And then finally, there's a resolution. Now, all of those elements of the plot are in this story. But I got to tell you, friends, this is not a Jane Austen novel. They're all in 1984, but they're much more disturbing. The climax and the exposition and they're all disturbing. And what we normally think of as a resolution, where you kind of breathe a sigh of relief and oh, it's like, oh, okay, everybody lives happily ever after. Oh, there's a resolution. There's a resolution in this story. But it's not one where you take a deep breath and you say, oh, everything's okay now. Yeah, you'll see. All right, friends, there you have it. That's our introductory video. In the next video, we're going to be looking at setting, geography, slogans, and ministry. So again, check out the Canvas page for the chapters that you want to read. And basically, again, I am going to be quoting from the book, and I am going to be referring to the book, but I'm not necessarily assuming that you've read up through certain chapters, because all of the lessons in the videos are going to be thematic. Although I will say this, I did choose the themes in such a way that the earlier themes are the ones that show up earlier in the book. Okay. I'm not going to be talking about Room 101 for a long time, because that doesn't show up until much later in the book. All right. All right, friends, there it is. There's our introduction. Go ahead and get started in your reading of 1984, and I'll see you in